The crystal chandeliers of Westbrook University's Grand Hall cast a warm glow over the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns below. I adjust my posture, feeling the soft fabric of my Valentino dress against my skin, a dress that cost more than my childhood home's annual mortgage. And now the moment we've all been waiting for. President Hamilton's voice echoes through the hall. It is my distinct honor to introduce the visionary behind the Second Chance Scholarship that has transformed Westbrook's reputation and diversity over these past 5 years. The crowd of faculty and donors turn toward me expectantly. I smile, the practiced smile of a woman who navigates boardrooms and charity galas with equal ease. But inside, my heart hammers against my ribs like it did 15 years ago in this very same hall. My fingers drift to my purse, feeling the outline of the manila envelope inside. The list, my security blanket and weapon all in one. Miss Maya Collins has single-handedly funded over 100 full scholarships for students from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented at Westbrook. President Hamilton continues. Her multi-million-dollar endowment came with unprecedented stipulations that, I must admit, initially raised eyebrows among our administration. A polite chuckle ripples through the audience. I don't laugh. Instead, I scan the front row where Dean Richard Westbrook sits, his silver hair perfectly coiffed and his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Beside him, Professor Elaine Parker adjusts her glasses nervously. Tonight, for the first time, Miss Collins has agreed to share with us the personal story behind her extraordinary generosity. President Hamilton says, extending his hand toward me, "Please welcome to the podium, Maya Collins." The applause washes over me as I rise from my chair. I touch the envelope in my purse once more, a talisman of sorts, before approaching the podium with measured steps. I look out at the sea of privileged faces, the pillars of an institution that once deemed me unworthy. My gaze settles on Dean Westbrook's smug smile. "Thank you, President Hamilton, for that kind introduction," I begin, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. 15 years ago, I stood in this same hall, but the circumstances were quite different. I pause, letting the words hang in the air. Dean Westbrook shifts in his seat, the first flicker of discomfort crossing his face. Professor Parker suddenly finds her program utterly fascinating. They don't recognize me yet, but they will. Little Creek didn't have much. A dried-up mining town with more boarded storefronts than open businesses, it was the kind of place people left, not where they built futures. But it was home. "Maya, did you finish your calculus homework?" Mom called from the kitchen, where she was simultaneously preparing dinner and helping my brother Ethan with his speech exercises. "All done," I replied. Though the truth was, I'd finished it 2 days ago and was now working on extra credit physics problems. "Need help with Ethan?" "I got it. You focus on that scholarship application." I looked down at the Westbrook University application materials spread across our worn dining table. The Opportunity Scholarship, a full ride including room, board, books, and even a stipend for living expenses. For someone like me, someone from Little Creek with a dead father, a mother working 2 jobs, and a brother with special needs, it wasn't just a scholarship, it was escape, salvation. My father's mining accident had left a hole in our family that could never be filled, but the subsequent evaporation of his pension due to company restructuring had created a financial nightmare from which we'd never recovered. Mom's jobs as a nurse's aide and weekend diner waitress barely kept food on the table, and Ethan's therapy covered. "Do you think they'll pick someone from Little Creek?" I asked, not for the first time. Mom paused her dinner preparations, wiping her hands on a dish towel before coming over to squeeze my shoulders. "Baby, they'd be fools not to pick you. You're the smartest person in this whole county, not just Little Creek." Her unwavering faith warmed me, but reality was colder. Westbrook University accepted fewer than a dozen opportunity scholars each year from thousands of applicants. Even with my perfect GPA and test scores that had made Miss Garcia, my English teacher, cry with pride, it was a long shot. But I had no choice but to try. Community college wasn't an option. We couldn't afford even that without significant aid. And without higher education, I'd be trapped in Little Creek forever, watching my potential wither like everything else in this town. The next day at school, I lingered after class. "Miss Garcia, can you look at my personal statement again?" She smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling. At 38, Miss Garcia could have taught at any school in the state, but she chose to stay in Little Creek. We've revised it 5 times, Maya. It's perfect. What if perfect isn't enough? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Miss Garcia sighed, setting down her pen. Maya Thompson, listen to me. Your essay is extraordinary because you are extraordinary. Your life hasn't been easy, but you've never used that as an excuse. Quite the opposite, you've used every hardship as fuel. But Westbrook is they're looking for exceptional students who will contribute meaningfully to their community. That's you. She handed me back my essay. Trust me, this is as good as it gets. Mail it today. 6 weeks of nail-biting anxiety later, a letter arrived. Miss Thompson, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a finalist for the Westbrook University Opportunity Scholarship. You are invited to campus for a final interview and reception on April 15th. I screamed so loudly that Mrs. Finch from next door came running over, convinced someone was being murdered. The celebration was short-lived when reality set in. The interview was in 3 weeks, and Westbrook was 4 hours away. We didn't have a reliable car for such a journey, and we certainly didn't have money for a hotel. I can take the bus, I said when Mom started talking about picking up extra shifts to cover the costs. And I can go and come back the same day. Absolutely not, Mom insisted. This is too important. We'll figure it out. We did figure it out, but barely. The bus ticket took most of my savings from my weekend library job. Miss Garcia loaned me her niece's navy blue interview suit, which was slightly too big, but the nicest thing I'd ever worn. Mom managed to book the cheapest motel on the outskirts of campus, requiring a 40-minute walk each way, but it was better than nothing. The morning of the interview, I stood in front of the motel's spotty mirror, trying to tame my wild dark hair into something professional. Mom had already left to get back for her shift, kissing me fiercely before going. Remember, she'd said, you deserve to be there just as much as anyone else. But standing on Westbrook's immaculate campus 2 hours later, I wasn't so sure. Students glided past in designer clothes, carrying MacBooks and speaking confidently about summer internships and family vacations in Europe. I clutched my folder of application materials and tried not to look as out of place as I felt in my borrowed suit and scuffed shoes I'd tried to polish with a motel washcloth. The interview waiting room was intimidating. 5 other finalists sat in plush chairs scrolling through phones or chatting easily about their impressive extracurriculars. One boy mentioned his research project had been published in a scientific journal. A girl with perfect blonde hair talked about her nonprofit that provided art therapy for refugee children. I sat quietly, rehearsing answers in my head, reminding myself that my 4.0 GPA and perfect SAT score had earned me this seat, that the hours spent studying by flashlight after Mom and Ethan went to bed to save on electricity had led me here. Maya Thompson? I looked up to see a student assistant with a clipboard. The committee is ready for you now. The interview room held 5 people seated behind a curved table. In the center sat Dean Richard Westbrook himself, a man whose family had founded the university generations ago. To his right was Professor Elaine Parker, chair of the scholarship committee. The others introduced themselves as faculty and an alumni representative, but my focus remained on the 2 central figures who held my future in their hands. Ms. Thompson, welcome to Westbrook, Dean Westbrook said without looking up from my file. Quite impressive test scores. Thank you, sir. Little Creek, he mused. I'm not familiar with it. It's a former mining town in the western part of the state, I explained. About 4 hours from here. I see, and your father was a miner? Yes, sir, he died in an accident when I was 11. A murmur of perfunctory sympathy circled the table. And despite these challenging circumstances, you've maintained a perfect academic record, Professor Parker noted, sounding genuinely impressed. That shows remarkable determination. The interview proceeded with questions about my coursework, my involvement in the school newspaper and math club, my goals for the future. I spoke about wanting to study economics and public policy, about creating systems that helped communities like mine recover from industrial collapse. For 40 minutes, I felt like I was soaring. My answers were articulate, thoughtful, exactly as I'd practiced. The committee seemed engaged, even impressed. Dean Westbrook had stopped checking his watch. Professor Parker was nodding encouragingly. That concludes our formal interview, Dean Westbrook finally said. We'll now proceed to the reception with current scholarship recipients and alumni. This is an opportunity for informal conversation and for you to learn more about the Westbrook community. My stomach clenched. Nobody had mentioned a reception. Nothing in the materials had prepared me for this additional evaluation. But I smiled and followed the committee to an elegant room where servers circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres and flutes of sparkling cider. The other finalists seamlessly integrated, laughing and chatting with alumni as though they'd been attending cocktail parties their entire lives. I stood awkwardly near a potted plant, unsure of the proper etiquette for taking food from passing trays or how to insert myself into conversations. First time at a reception like this? A friendly voice asked. I turned to see a current student, her name tag identifying her as a junior opportunity scholar. Is it that obvious? I asked with a self-conscious laugh. Only to another fish out of water, she said kindly. I'm Zoe. I grew up in public housing in the city. The first time I came to one of these, I accidentally ate the decorative garnish on my plate. Her confession eased my anxiety a fraction. I'm Maya from Little Creek. Never heard of it, which probably means we have similar backgrounds, she said. Quick tip, stick with me. Take tiny bites so you're never caught talking with your mouth full. And remember, you have just as much right to be here as the legacy kids whose great-grandpas have buildings named after them. With Zoe's guidance, I navigated the reception more confidently, meeting alumni and asking questions about their experiences. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine belonging here, walking these hallowed halls, accessing opportunities I'd only dreamed about. Then I overheard it. I was refilling my water glass when Dean Westbrook's distinctive voice carried from a nearby alcove, where he stood with Professor Parker and an elderly alumnus. The Thompson girl has impressive academics, certainly, he was saying, but I question whether she's Westbrook material. Her background is certainly unusual for our program, the alumnus replied. It's not just her background, Professor Parker added. Did you notice during the reception? She clearly hasn't been exposed to the kind of social environments our students typically navigate. Westbrook graduates attend state dinners and corporate galas. I'm concerned she would struggle with the social aspects of the Westbrook experience. She ate the stuffed mushroom with her fingers, Dean Westbrook said with a slight chuckle. And did you see her suit? At least 2 sizes too large. Richard, her academic qualifications are undeniable, Professor Parker said, though her tone suggested it was a token protest. Academics aren't everything, Elaine. We're cultivating future leaders here, not just scholars. The Wilson boy, on the other hand. Now there's a candidate with the complete Westbrook package. His father and I were just golfing last weekend, the alumnus added. Fine family, the Wilsons. I backed away silently, my water glass trembling in my hand. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of humiliation and despair. My borrowed suit felt even more ill-fitting now, my presence even more conspicuous. I struggled to maintain conversations, knowing what they really thought of me. 2 weeks later, the thin envelope arrived. Dear Miss Thompson, thank you for your interest in the Westbrook University Opportunity Scholarship. After careful consideration, we regret to inform you that you have not been selected for this year's program. No explanation, no feedback. Just a form rejection that erased months of hope and preparation. I learned later through the local paper that Jamie Wilson, son of a bank executive from the wealthy side of the county, had received the scholarship. His academic record was good, but not exceptional like mine. But he knew which fork to use at dinner, and his father golfed with the right people. The rejection gutted me. I spent 3 days in bed, emerging only because Mom couldn't afford to miss work to care for Ethan. The community college acceptance I'd received as a backup suddenly seemed like a cruel joke. We still couldn't afford it without significant aid, and their scholarship funds had already been allocated. Maybe next year, Mom suggested gently. But we both knew there was no next year. Westbrook's Opportunity Scholarship was only available to incoming freshmen. My one shot had come and gone. I took a job at the Gas and Go on the edge of town, working the night shift so I could help with Ethan during the day while Mom worked. The manager was a former classmate of my father's and didn't mind when I brought textbooks to read during slow periods. I'd convinced myself I could save enough for at least a few community college classes by spring. It was a fantasy that evaporated when mom started getting headaches. Persistent, blinding headaches that pain relievers couldn't touch. The diagnosis came 6 months after my Westbrook rejection. Stage 3 glioblastoma, inoperable. Expensive treatments that might extend her life by months, not years. Whatever savings I'd managed to accumulate vanished into the black hole of medical bills not covered by mom's inadequate insurance. Community college became an impossible luxury. I added weekend shifts at the factory that made plastic components for car dashboards, standing for 12 hours at a stretch on a concrete floor, my hands cramping from the repetitive motions. I watched from afar as Jamie Wilson posted photos from Westbrook on social media. Elegant study spaces, campus traditions, spring break trips with new friends. I unfollowed him after seeing a post complaining about having to write a 5-page paper when my mother had spent that day vomiting from chemotherapy. By 22, I'd cycled through 6 jobs, eventually landing at Fast Cash, a payday loan company that paid better than most places in Little Creek, but required me to look desperate people in the eye as I explained the exorbitant interest rates they'd be paying. I hated it, but it offered health insurance that helped with Ethan's therapy and the ongoing costs of mom's palliative care. At night, after mom and Ethan were asleep, I studied. Our local library had limited resources, but interlibrary loan and the occasional free online course became my university. I learned about finance and business operations, economics and market systems. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was studying the very mechanisms that kept communities like Little Creek trapped in poverty. When mom died, I felt like I'd failed her. All her sacrifices, all her faith in me. And I was still stuck in Little Creek, still working a job I hated, still watching other people live the life that should have been mine. "It's not your fault," Miss Garcia told me at the funeral. "You've done everything possible." But it didn't feel that way. It felt like I'd let everyone down, including myself. Ethan's care became more complex. At 18, he aged out of many support programs, creating new financial pressures. I took on management responsibilities at Fast Cash, negotiating a schedule that allowed me to be home when Ethan needed me. The increased salary helped, but my soul withered a little more each day I spent in that predatory environment. The bitterness grew like a tumor, not unlike the one that took my mother. Every time I saw a Westbrook bumper sticker or heard the university mentioned on the news for some achievement or donation, I felt it twisting deeper. Every time I approved a loan for someone as desperate as I had been, knowing they'd likely be trapped in the same cycle of debt that ensnared most of our customers, I thought about educational systems that perpetuated inequality rather than alleviating it. One rainy night in October, driving home after a double shift, exhaustion clouded my judgment. The truck appeared suddenly on the wet road, or perhaps I dozed for just a second. I swerved instinctively, but it was too late. The impact was deafening. Metal crunched against metal. My small sedan spun across the center line and down the embankment. Pain exploded through my body as the airbag deployed. Then stillness, rain pattering on the crumpled hood, the hiss of the damaged engine, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. I couldn't move. Couldn't reach my phone to call for help. As darkness crept in from the edges of my vision, a strange calm settled over me. This is it, I thought. This is how it ends. 27 years of struggle and sacrifice, and what did I have to show for it? A job I despised. A mountain of medical debt. Unfulfilled potential. Ethan's face flashed in my mind. Who would care for him now? "I'm sorry," I whispered to no one and everyone. "I'm so sorry." The darkness grew heavier, pulling me under. If only I could do it all again, knowing what I know now. The thought flickered like a dying bulb, and then there was nothing. "Maya, you're going to be late for school." My eyes snapped open, heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted to escape. Sunlight streamed through faded blue curtains I hadn't seen in a decade. I bolted upright, disoriented by the familiar surroundings of my childhood bedroom. Posters from high school adorned the walls, bands I'd forgotten I'd loved, a periodic table, a map of the world with pins marking places I'd dreamed of visiting but never had. My calculus textbook sat on the desk next to a stack of college brochures. "What the hell?" I whispered, my voice catching as I realized it sounded different. Higher, younger. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the mirror on my closet door. A 17-year-old girl stared back at me, eyes wide with shock. Wild dark hair tangled from sleep. This isn't possible, I muttered, touching my face, my arms, pinching myself hard enough to leave a mark. The pain felt real. Everything felt real. Maya, Mom's voice called again from downstairs. Breakfast is ready. Mom. I bolted from the room, taking the stairs two at a time, nearly colliding with her at the bottom. Whoa there, she laughed, steadying me with hands that were warm and alive and strong. What's the rush? A sob caught in my throat as I threw my arms around her, breathing in the familiar scent of drugstore shampoo and coffee. She was here, alive. No tumor devouring her brain, no hospital pallor, no morphine haze. Maya, what's wrong, baby? Concern replaced the humor in her voice as she gently pushed me back to look at my face. Nothing, I managed, wiping at tears I couldn't control. Just a bad dream. A really bad dream. Must have been terrible, she said, brushing hair from my face with the tender gesture I'd missed for so long. But you're awake now, and you have mail, something from Westbrook University. My blood froze. The envelope she held out was thick, not the thin rejection I remembered. It came yesterday while you were at Miss Garcia's reviewing your application, Mom continued. I was going to give it to you last night, but you were so tired when you got home. With trembling hands, I took the envelope. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. People didn't die and wake up 10 years in the past. Yet everything around me suggested exactly that had happened. I tore open the envelope, already knowing what it would say. Miss Thompson, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a finalist for the Westbrook University Opportunity Scholarship. The date of the interview was exactly as I remembered, April 15th. I got an interview, I said mechanically. Mom whooped with joy, grabbing me for another hug. I knew it. I knew they'd want to meet you. Over her shoulder, I spotted the calendar on the kitchen wall. If this was real, and every sensory input suggested it was, I had just received the interview invitation that had ultimately led to crushing rejection and the derailment of my life. We need to figure out how to get you there, Mom was saying, already worried about logistics. Maybe I can pick up an extra weekend shift. Let me think about it, I interrupted. I need to process this. Concern flickered across her face. Aren't you excited? This is what you've been working toward. Yes, and it ended in heartbreak. Of course I'm excited, I lied, just surprised. Let me get dressed for school. Back in my room, I sank onto the bed, mind racing. Was this real? A coma dream? Some bizarre hallucination in the moments before death? I had no way of knowing, but the detail was too precise, too consistent to dismiss. If this was real, if I had somehow returned to my 17-year-old self with all the knowledge and experience of my 27-year-old self, then I had been given something unprecedented. A second chance. I needed to test it. Picking up my ancient flip phone from the nightstand, I scrolled through the limited contact list until I found Miss Garcia's number. Miss Garcia, it's Maya. Maya, is everything all right? You're not skipping school, are you? The familiar concern in her voice made my chest ache. No, I took a deep breath. The principal is going to announce budget cuts at the assembly today, isn't he? Including canceling the senior trip? Silence on the other end. How could you possibly know that? The board just voted last night, and Principal Delaney only told faculty this morning. My heart skipped. I'd been right. That announcement had devastated our class. The senior trip was a tradition, and for many like me, the only chance to leave Little Creek before graduation. Just a guess, I said weakly. There have been rumors. Well, keep that information to yourself until the official announcement, all right? And Maya, I'm sorry. I know you were looking forward to the trip. I hung up, my mind whirling with implications. I remembered that day clearly, the assembly, the announcement, the collective groan of disappointment. It had happened exactly as I'd just predicted. This was real. Somehow, impossibly, I'd been given a second chance at life. And the first major crossroads was already in front of me, the Westbrook interview. I knew exactly how that path ended. This time, I wouldn't be walking it blindly. That evening, I sat cross-legged on my bed, notebook open in front of me, planning my new future with the methodical precision of someone who had already lived through the consequences of poor choices. The first decision was easy. I would still attend the Westbrook interview, but with entirely different goals. Last time, I'd entered that interview desperate to prove I belonged in their world. This time, I would make them prove they deserved someone like me. I thought about Dean Westbrook and Professor Parker, how they dismissed me not for my academic potential, but for my social awkwardness, my secondhand suit, my inability to navigate their unspoken rules. The memory still stung, but now it was fuel rather than poison. What had I learned in my previous life that could help me now? For one, I understood financial systems much better after years at Fast Cash. I knew how loans worked, how credit was established, how debt became a trap for people like my family. I also understood the value of connections, how doors opened for some while remaining firmly closed for others, regardless of merit. Most importantly, I knew what was coming: Mom's cancer, the medical bills, Ethan's needs. This time, I could prepare. First things first, the Westbrook interview. I would approach it differently, not as a desperate supplicant, but as an observer gathering intelligence. I would let them reveal their biases while I recorded evidence of their discrimination. I borrowed Miss Garcia's suit again, but made alterations to highlight rather than hide my working class background. I practiced answers that unapologetically addressed my circumstances without the desperate need for approval I'd shown last time. The day before the interview, I made a crucial purchase with my library job savings: a small digital recorder. It was technically legal in our state to record conversations, as long as one party, me, was aware of it. I tested it multiple times, ensuring it would capture voices clearly from my pocket. The Westbrook campus was just as intimidating the second time around. The immaculate buildings, the well-dressed students, the aura of privilege that radiated from every manicured hedge. But this time, I walked through it differently, observing rather than aspiring, cataloging injustices rather than internalizing them. In the interview room, I recognized everyone immediately. Dean Westbrook hadn't aged a day in my memory. The same silver hair, the same air of entitled authority. Professor Parker's nervous habit of adjusting her glasses was exactly as I recalled. "Miss Thompson, welcome to Westbrook," Dean Westbrook began without looking up from my file. "Quite impressive test scores." "Thank you," I replied simply, not appending the "sir" that had come so automatically before. A small rebellion, but it felt significant. The questions proceeded as I remembered, but my answers were different. More confident, less desperate to please. When asked about my background, I didn't minimize the hardships or sugarcoat Little Creek's decay. My father died in a mining accident that could have been prevented if the company had followed safety regulations, I stated flatly. The same company that dissolved his pension fund through legal loopholes, leaving families like mine without the financial security we'd been promised. That experience shaped my interest in economic policy and corporate accountability. Dean Westbrook shifted uncomfortably. Professor Parker's eyebrows rose slightly. "And how do you think such perspectives would fit into the Westbrook community?" Dean Westbrook asked. I smiled, the calm smile of someone who already knew the outcome of this game. "I think diverse perspectives are essential to any institution that claims to value academic excellence and social leadership. Unless, of course, those are just marketing slogans rather than genuine values." A charged silence followed. I had been bolder than in my previous life, but not outright confrontational. Let them show their true colors. The reception afterward was easier to navigate with my foreknowledge. I knew which foods could be eaten without embarrassment, how to enter conversations gracefully, which current students might be sympathetic to my situation. But I also intentionally highlighted my background, mentioning Little Creek's economic struggles and my family's challenges when appropriate. As the event wound down, I excused myself to use the restroom, the same one where I'd stopped to compose myself after overhearing their dismissive comments in my previous life. This time, I left my recorder running in the outer room, tucked beneath a decorative table while I actually used the facilities. When I retrieved it 20 minutes later, I knew I'd captured exactly what I needed. I didn't even need to listen to confirm their bias. I remembered their words too clearly. But this time, I had evidence. 2 weeks later, the thin envelope arrived exactly as expected. "Dear Miss Thompson, thank you for your interest in the Westbrook University Opportunity Scholarship. After careful consideration, we regret to inform you that you have not been selected for this year's program. I added it to a new folder labeled Evidence in my desk drawer, alongside the transcript I'd made of the recorded conversation and notes about the qualifications of other candidates I'd researched online. Jamie Wilson's acceptance was announced in the local paper the following week, just as before. But this time, I felt only cold determination rather than crushing disappointment. I had confirmed what I already knew. The system was rigged. Now I could focus on building an alternate path, one that would ultimately lead me back to Westbrook, but on very different terms. Are you sure about State University? Mom asked, concern etched on her face. Their academic program isn't nearly as prestigious as Westbrook. I'm sure, I replied, setting down the acceptance letter from State that included a partial scholarship. Not a full ride, but enough to make it feasible with loans and part-time work. Their economics department is solid, and they have good connections to regional businesses. What I didn't tell her was that I knew exactly which professors to seek out at State, which classes would provide the most valuable skills, which campus jobs would offer the best networking opportunities. In my previous life, I'd researched these paths too late, after years of dead-end jobs had already narrowed my options. Besides, I added, it's only 2 hours away. I can come home on weekends to help with Ethan. Mom's face softened. You don't need to worry about us. This is your time to focus on your future. I hugged her fiercely. That's exactly what I'm doing. My first strategic decision was accepting the financial aid package from State, even though it meant taking on some debt. In my previous life, fear of debt had kept me from pursuing education until it was too late. This time, I understood that strategic debt for education was an investment, not just a burden. My second was choosing a more practical on-campus job. Rather than the library position most students wanted for its quiet study time, I took a job in the Alumni Relations Office, where I could observe how university fundraising worked and build connections with successful graduates. You have a knack for this, my supervisor remarked after I'd reorganized the donor database to identify alumni with consistent giving patterns. Most freshmen aren't so interested in the back end of university operations. I find systems fascinating, I replied truthfully, especially ones that determine who gets opportunities and who doesn't. College was surreal the second time around. Courses that had seemed intimidating in concept were often basic compared to the real-world knowledge I'd accumulated. I tested out of introductory classes where possible and constructed a more advanced curriculum that combined economics, finance, nonprofit management, and public policy. Professor Sharma, my economics advisor, raised eyebrows at my course selections. This is quite ambitious for a freshman, Maya. Most students ease into college more gradually. I don't have time to ease in, I said simply. I have specific goals. Those goals extended beyond academics. I needed to build the connections and credentials that would give me leverage later. I joined the student government, volunteered for the Economic Development Committee, and found a research assistantship with Professor Chen, whose work on educational access and socioeconomic mobility aligned perfectly with my long-term plans. But my most important project remained at home. 3 months into my first semester, I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Patel, the neurologist in the next county, who would eventually diagnose my mother's tumor. Mom, I need you to come with me to this appointment, I told her over fall break. Maya, I'm fine, just a few headaches. It's stress and too much coffee. Humor me, I insisted, not telling her that I'd described symptoms she hadn't even experienced yet to get the appointment. Think of it as preventative care. The MRI revealed what I'd feared and expected, a small mass just beginning to form. But unlike in my previous life, we'd caught it early, stage 1, not stage 3. It's very fortunate you insisted on these tests, Dr. Patel told us, his expression grave but not hopeless. At this stage, we have much more treatment options. Mom underwent surgery 2 weeks later, followed by targeted radiation. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic. I took a 3-week leave from classes, coordinating with professors to complete assignments remotely while I helped Mom through initial recovery and arranged additional support for Ethan. The medical bills were substantial, but not the catastrophic amounts from my previous life's late-stage treatments. I applied for every assistance program available, leveraging my new knowledge of financial systems to navigate the healthcare bureaucracy more effectively. We refinanced the house, a decision I'd resisted in my previous life but now recognized as strategic rather than desperate. I don't understand how you know how to do all this, Mom said one evening as I completed yet another assistance application. You make it look so easy. I've been studying these systems, I replied, which was true enough. Besides, it's not that different from figuring out college financial aid. By spring semester, Mom's prognosis had improved significantly, and I returned to campus with renewed focus. My work with Professor Chen expanded into a joint research project on educational equity across socioeconomic backgrounds, research I knew would prove valuable for my future plans. Have you considered where you'll apply for internships next summer? Professor Chen asked as we analyzed data on scholarship distribution at top universities. I'm looking at financial institutions, I replied, remembering which companies had weathered the economic storms in my previous life, particularly those with significant educational endowment management. Professor Chen looked surprised. That's unusually specific for a sophomore. I smiled. I like to plan ahead. My sophomore year proceeded with the same strategic precision. I maintained a perfect GPA while expanding my network and focusing on building skills I knew would matter: investment analysis, grant writing, educational policy, and public speaking. I joined the debate team not for my resume, but to sharpen my ability to persuade, a skill I'd need later. Summer arrived, and with it my carefully selected internship at Meridian Financial, a mid-sized firm with a growing educational endowment division. The position paid just enough to allow me to rent a small apartment near home, enabling me to check on Mom and Ethan regularly while gaining the professional experience I needed. You're remarkably knowledgeable for an intern, my supervisor commented after I identified a pattern in university endowment investments that even senior analysts had overlooked. I find this area fascinating, I replied, which was true. Understanding how wealth generated more wealth, how money moved through institutions and either reinforced or occasionally disrupted existing power structures was essential to my plan. By my junior year, Mom's cancer was in remission. The medical bills had been substantial but manageable, thanks to early intervention and my aggressive pursuit of every available assistance program. I'd arranged better support services for Ethan, drawing on resources I hadn't known existed in my previous life. My academic focus narrowed further to the intersection of educational access and financial systems. Professor Chen became not just a mentor, but an ally, connecting me with researchers at other universities who shared my interest in educational equity. You should consider graduate school, he suggested during an advising session. With your research focus and academic performance, you could get into top programs. I'm considering it, I said, though my plans were much more specific than he realized. But I want some real-world experience first. That real-world experience came sooner than expected. A contact from my internship reached out about a part-time analyst position I could hold during my senior year, analyzing educational endowment performance and strategies. The schedule was flexible enough to accommodate my classes, and the compensation would help ease the financial pressure at home. I graduated with highest honors, turning down several job offers in favor of a specific position at Wellington Investments, a firm I knew from my previous life would weather upcoming market fluctuations better than most. The role focused on educational and nonprofit investment strategies, exactly the expertise I needed to build. Are you sure about this one? Mom asked when I told her my decision. The offer from Goldman Sachs had better starting pay. I'm sure, I said confidently. Wellington is smaller, but their approach aligns better with my goals. Besides, it's about the long game, not the starting salary. The long game. That's how I viewed everything now. Each decision a calculated move toward the future I was rebuilding. A future where Westbrook University would eventually feature prominently, but not as my alma mater. As my would-be alternate self, the Maya who never got this second chance, would have been struggling through dead-end jobs and mounting medical debt. I was instead building credentials, connections, and capital. Not just financial capital, though that too was accumulating faster than anyone would have expected, but social and knowledge capital that would prove even more valuable. And throughout it all, I never forgot the manila folder in my desk drawer, the one labeled Evidence. The folder that had expanded to include research on Westbrook's scholarship patterns, documentation of socioeconomic bias in their admissions, and the names of dozens of students like me, qualified candidates who had been rejected in favor of those with better connections or social polish. My revenge, I had decided, would not be quick or petty. It would be systemic, thorough, and ultimately transformative. Not just for me, but for every student who deserved a chance they hadn't received. Collins, we need to talk about these projections. I looked up from my computer to see Daniel Harrington, Wellington's managing director, standing in my office doorway. After 3 years at the firm, I'd recently been promoted to senior analyst with my own modest office. Problem with the numbers? I asked, already knowing there wasn't. That's just it, Harrington said, closing the door behind him. Your projections from last quarter were spot on, down to the percentage point in some cases. No one's that good, especially not with this market volatility. I smiled calmly. I've been studying these patterns for a long time. What I couldn't tell him was that I'd lived through these market fluctuations before. I knew which companies would weather economic downturns, which emerging technologies would revolutionize industries, which seemingly stable investments would collapse. It wasn't insider trading, it was unprecedented foresight. Well, the board has noticed, Harrington continued. They're offering you management of a new fund focused on emerging technologies and educational institutions. Smaller portfolio to start, but with significant growth potential. This was happening faster than in my previous trajectory, but I was prepared. I'm interested, but I'd like some unusual provisions in my contract, such as performance-based compensation with a higher percentage than standard. And I want the ability to make certain investments at my discretion, even if they don't align with traditional metrics. Harrington frowned. That's not how we typically structure these positions. My projections aren't typical either, I countered. Check my track record against anyone else in the firm. I'll wait. 2 weeks later, I signed a contract that gave me precisely the flexibility I needed. The timing couldn't have been better. It was 2008, and I knew exactly which companies would not only survive the coming financial crisis, but emerge stronger. While other fund managers panicked as markets collapsed, I moved with calm precision, positioning investments in companies like Amazon, Apple, and Netflix that I knew would explode in value over the coming decade. I allocated funds to emerging educational technology platforms that traditional analysts overlooked, and I began quietly accumulating Bitcoin long before it entered mainstream awareness. How did you know? A colleague asked after I'd predicted the rapid recovery of a tech company that had seemed on the verge of collapse. Thorough research, I replied with a smile that revealed nothing of my impossible advantage. My reputation spread through financial circles as the analyst with an almost supernatural ability to predict market trends. My personal wealth grew exponentially through my compensation structure, but I lived modestly, a nice but not extravagant apartment, a reliable car, quality but not flashy clothes. Every extra dollar was strategically invested to further my ultimate goal. By 25, I had enough capital to establish my own boutique investment firm, Collins Capital Partners, focusing on educational endowments, technology investments, and ethical funding mechanisms for underprivileged communities. I hired a small team of like-minded analysts and researchers, including several who had faced educational barriers similar to mine. Why education? A journalist asked during a rare interview for a financial publication. Most successful fund managers your age are focused on more lucrative sectors. Education is the ultimate leverage point, I explained. It's where opportunity is either created or denied. And I'm particularly interested in the financial mechanisms that determine who gets access to quality education and who doesn't. The article generated unexpected attention, including from universities seeking investment guidance for their endowments. I was selective about my clients, but began building relationships with several institutions, gathering information, understanding their financial structures, and identifying key decision makers. But Westbrook wasn't among them. Not yet. I was methodically building toward that confrontation, compiling information on their scholarship practices and tracking students they'd rejected, who, like me, had the academic qualifications but lacked the social connections or polish. Finding those students proved easier than I'd expected. I created an anonymous survey distributed to community colleges and state universities near Westbrook, identifying students who had been Opportunity Scholarship finalists but hadn't received the award. Patterns emerged quickly. Most came from lower socioeconomic backgrounds despite stellar academic records. One name caught my attention: Zoe Martinez. The same Zoe who had helped me navigate that fateful reception in my previous life. She'd been a junior opportunity scholar when I interviewed, but according to my research, she'd nearly lost her scholarship after her sophomore year, despite maintaining a 3.8 GPA. I arranged a chance meeting at a financial literacy workshop I sponsored at her current workplace, a nonprofit serving first-generation college students. Miss Martinez, Maya Collins, I admire the work you're doing here. Recognition flickered across her face, though we'd never met in this timeline. Have we met before? You seem familiar. I don't believe so, but I've followed your work. I'm interested in educational access issues, particularly at elite institutions like Westbrook. Her expression shifted slightly at the mention of Westbrook. That's a complex topic. I imagine it is. Perhaps we could discuss it further. My firm is considering establishing a scholarship fund, and I'd value your insights. Over coffee the following week, Zoe's story unfolded. She'd nearly lost her scholarship after speaking out about discriminatory practices in the program. Only a faculty member's intervention had saved her funding, with the understanding that she would be more diplomatic in the future. They expect gratitude, not criticism, she explained, stirring her coffee absently, even when the criticism is valid and could improve the program. Did you know many other qualified applicants who were rejected? I asked. Zoe's laugh was bitter. Dozens. I served on the student panel for 3 years. I watched them reject incredible candidates because they didn't know which fork to use or couldn't talk about their European vacations. Would you still have names? Or ways to contact some of these students? She studied me carefully. Why are you so interested? Let's just say I'm familiar with Westbrook's practices and believe they deserve reconsideration. A slow smile spread across Zoe's face. I might have kept some notes, unofficially, of course. That meeting marked the beginning of a powerful alliance. Zoe introduced me to other former opportunity scholars who shared similar concerns. Through them, I built a network of rejected applicants, brilliant students whose paths had been arbitrarily diverted by Westbrook's biased selection process. Meanwhile, my firm's success continued to exceed even my own expectations. By 27, my personal net worth had surpassed $50 million, a fortune built on impossible foreknowledge and strategic patience. I maintained a deliberately low profile, declining most interview requests and focusing on building the infrastructure for what came next. The final piece fell into place when one of my researchers discovered a troubling pattern in Westbrook's endowment management: significant underperformance compared to peer institutions, coupled with unusually high fees to certain financial advisors. Further investigation revealed several of these advisors had personal connections to Dean Westbrook and other university officials. It's not exactly illegal, my legal counsel advised after reviewing the documents, but it's definitely unethical and potentially breaches fiduciary responsibility. I smiled, adding the information to my now substantial file on Westbrook's institutional failures. Perfect. At 28, with all the pieces in place, I was ready to launch the next phase of my plan. The Collins Foundation for Educational Opportunity was established with the little fanfare: a press release, a modest website, and an initial endowment of $20 million that raised eyebrows in philanthropic circles but generated minimal public attention. Our mission is to identify and support promising students who have been overlooked by traditional scholarship systems, read the Foundation's mission statement. We believe talent and potential exist everywhere, but opportunity does not. What wasn't publicly stated was the Foundation's specific focus: identifying and supporting students who had been rejected by prestigious scholarship programs despite stellar qualifications, particularly those rejected by one program in particular. I hired Zoe Martinez as the Foundation's first program director, leveraging her experience and network to identify potential scholarship recipients. Together, we developed a unique approach. Rather than forcing students to find us, we would find them. We've located someone I think you should meet, Zoe said during our weekly review, sliding a file across my desk. Tanya Williams applied to Westbrook's Opportunity Scholarship 4 years ago. Perfect academics, compelling personal story, rejected after the final round. I opened the file, scanning Tanya's information. Where is she now? Working as a bank teller while taking night classes at community college. Still has dreams of finishing her degree, but supporting her younger siblings after their mother's illness. The parallels to my own story were unmistakable, though Tanya's timeline was several years behind mine. Arrange a meeting, let's see how we can help. Tanya was one of our first success stories. With the foundation's support, she transferred to a 4-year university, completed her degree in accounting, and eventually joined a respected regional firm. But she was far from the last. Over the next 2 years, the Collins Foundation identified and supported over 50 students with similar stories, all rejected by prestigious scholarship programs despite exceptional qualifications, all from disadvantaged backgrounds, all demonstrating remarkable resilience and potential. We didn't just provide financial support, we created a comprehensive program including mentorship, internship placements, professional development, and most importantly, a community of peers who understood the unique challenges these students faced. What you've built here is remarkable, commented Dr. Elise Wong, an education policy expert who joined our advisory board. But I'm curious, why the focus on students rejected from specific programs? Why not just create your own criteria from scratch? Because they've already done the hard work of identifying exceptional candidates, I explained. They just applied the wrong final filter. The foundation's success stories accumulated rapidly. Tanya Williams became a CPA and mentor to new students in the program. Marcus Johnson completed his engineering degree and received 2 job offers from top firms. Sofia Rodriguez earned a full scholarship to medical school based on research she'd conducted with foundation support. Each success reinforced what I'd always known: the talent and determination had never been lacking, only the opportunity. As the foundation's reputation grew, I expanded our focus to include research and advocacy. We commissioned studies on bias in scholarship selection, published reports on socioeconomic factors in higher education access, and began building relationships with universities interested in improving their diversity and inclusion practices, all except Westbrook. Them, we studied from afar, meticulously documenting their patterns and practices while compiling our most compelling case studies. Why not approach them? Zoe asked during a strategy session. We have enough evidence now to make a convincing case for reform. Not yet, I replied. Westbrook won't change based on moral arguments or even evidence. They'll change when it benefits them directly, when the cost of continuing their practices outweighs the benefit. Creating that equation required one more major step: building our arsenal of undeniable success stories while simultaneously identifying Westbrook's vulnerability. That vulnerability appeared sooner than expected. A financial report revealed Westbrook was facing significant budget constraints due to endowment underperformance and declining alumni donations. The university had recently announced cutbacks to several programs, though notably not to the lavish events and facilities that catered to their wealthiest students. This is our opening, I told my executive team. They need money and we have it, but they'll receive it on our terms. I directed our researchers to compile the most compelling evidence of both Westbrook's biased practices and our foundation's contrasting successes. We prepared a proposal for a major endowment, the Second Chance Scholarship, with specific provisions that would fundamentally alter how Westbrook selected scholarship recipients. Will they accept these terms? My chief counsel asked after reviewing the document. They're unprecedented in higher education philanthropy. They'll accept, I said confidently, because the alternative is continuing their spiral of financial constraints while watching our foundation's recipients succeed elsewhere. As predicted, Westbrook's initial response was hesitant but interested. 3 meetings later, with the university president and several board members present, the negotiations began in earnest. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that everything had unfolded exactly according to my plan. A plan 15 years in the making, or perhaps only 10, depending on how one counted. A $25 million endowment is certainly generous, President Hamilton said, addressing me across the polished conference table in Westbrook's administration building. But some of these conditions are unusual. I smiled politely. The conditions are essential to the mission of the endowment, President Hamilton. The Second Chance Scholarship isn't just about money, it's about transforming access and opportunity. Transformation is certainly a priority for Westbrook, he replied carefully. But we have established processes for scholarship selection that have served us well for generations. Have they? I asked, pushing a folder across the table. Our research suggests otherwise. These graphs show the socioeconomic distribution of your Opportunity Scholars over the past 20 years. Notice anything striking? The president glanced at the charts, his expression carefully neutral. We select based on merit and potential. The data suggests additional factors are at play, I countered. When controlling for academic achievement, applicants from the lowest income quartile are selected at less than 1/8 the rate of those from the top quartile. That's not merit, that's systemic bias. Dean Westbrook, silver-haired and distinguished as ever, cleared his throat. Miss Collins, while we appreciate your interest in our programs, Westbrook has maintained the highest standards of academic excellence for over a century. Our selection processes are thorough and fair. I turned toward him, maintaining a pleasant expression despite the surge of old anger. Excellence and equity aren't mutually exclusive, Dean Westbrook. In fact, our foundation's research demonstrates they're complementary. That's why our endowment requires transparent, quantifiable selection criteria and a diverse committee structure. Which brings us to another unusual condition, President Hamilton interjected, clearly trying to redirect the conversation. Your requirement for direct involvement in the selection process through your foundation representatives. A necessary provision to ensure the endowment achieves its intended purpose, I explained. We're not asking for control, merely oversight and partnership. The negotiations continued for nearly 3 hours, with Westbrook's administration attempting to modify or dilute various provisions, while I held firm on the core requirements. Throughout the discussion, I noticed Professor Parker watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Not quite recognition, but a certain unease. Perhaps we should adjourn for today, President Hamilton finally suggested. This is a significant decision requiring board consultation. I gathered my materials unhurriedly. Of course, though I should mention that several other universities have expressed interest in hosting this endowment. Our timeline for decision is relatively short. That wasn't strictly true, but the implied competition had the desired effect. President Hamilton's practiced smile tightened slightly. We'll be in touch within the week, Miss Collins. Westbrook values this potential partnership. 3 days later, I received the call I'd been expecting. Westbrook was prepared to accept the endowment with minor modifications to the implementation timeline, but no substantive changes to the selection criteria or oversight provisions. The final contract was signed in President Hamilton's office on a crisp autumn morning. As we posed for the obligatory handshake photo, Dean Westbrook approached me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Collins, I don't believe I've asked what connection you have to Westbrook. Did family members attend? No, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. No family connection. Let's just say I've long been aware of Westbrook's reputation and selection processes. His smile faltered slightly, but before he could respond, President Hamilton called him away for another photo opportunity. I watched him go, savoring the moment. He didn't recognize me. None of them did. In their world, Maya Thompson had vanished after her rejection, becoming just another statistic, another qualified applicant deemed not Westbrook material. But Maya Collins was someone they couldn't ignore, a successful financier, a philanthropist with resources they desperately needed, a force they would have to reckon with whether they recognized me or not. Phase 1 was complete. The endowment was established, the terms secured. Now began the more satisfying phase, the actual transformation of Westbrook's scholarship practices, one decision at a time. The committee has concerns about candidate 37, Professor Parker said, adjusting her glasses as she had for the past 15 years. While her academic credentials are certainly strong, there are questions about her preparedness for Westbrook's social environment. 6 months had passed since the establishment of the Second Chance Scholarship, and I was attending my first selection committee meeting as the foundation's representative. The committee comprised 3 Westbrook faculty members, 2 administrators, an alumni representative, and me, an arrangement specified in our endowment agreement. Could you elaborate on those concerns? I asked calmly, though I already knew exactly what she meant. Professor Parker shifted uncomfortably. Her interview responses suggested limited exposure to certain cultural experiences that are common among our student body. There's concern she might feel isolated or struggle to integrate. Interesting, I replied, opening a folder. Because according to our new quantitative rubric, candidate 37 scored in the top percentile for academic achievement, leadership potential, and community impact. Those are the criteria specified in the scholarship guidelines. Yes, but the rubric doesn't include cultural experiences or social polish, I continued pleasantly. By design. Unless there's a specific academic or character concern, these factors shouldn't influence our decision. Dean Westbrook, who attended these meetings though he wasn't officially on the committee, cleared his throat. Miss Collins, Westbrook isn't merely an academic institution. We're developing future leaders who must navigate complex social environments. These considerations are relevant to student success. I understand that perspective, Dean Westbrook, I responded. However, research demonstrates that students from diverse backgrounds bring valuable perspectives and innovations. And our foundation's support services are specifically designed to help students navigate any transition challenges. The discussion continued with subtle but persistent attempts to prioritize candidates with more rounded profiles. Code for wealthier, more connected applicants. But the structure I'd built into the endowment agreement gave me significant leverage. By the end of the meeting, 8 of the 10 second chance scholarships had been awarded to students who would likely have been rejected under Westbrook's previous system. That was quite remarkable. Dr. Helen Rivera, a newer faculty member on the committee, commented as we left the meeting. I've served on scholarship committees for 5 years, and I've never seen selections made so objectively. That's precisely the goal, I replied. Merit-based opportunity benefits everyone, the students, the university, and ultimately society. Dr. Rivera nodded thoughtfully. I've had concerns about our selection processes for some time, but as a junior faculty member, she trailed off, the implication clear. Change is difficult in established institutions, I acknowledged. Sometimes it requires external pressure. Over the following months, I expanded my presence at Westbrook, always within the bounds of our agreement, but pushing those bounds whenever possible. I requested access to historical scholarship records for endowment performance assessment, access that revealed patterns even more troubling than I'd anticipated. Names jumped out from the files. Brilliant students from backgrounds like mine who had been rejected with comments like rough around the edges or not a natural fit for Westbrook culture. Alongside these rejections were acceptances for students with weaker academic credentials, but family names that appeared on campus buildings or donor lists. Each file strengthened my resolve and expanded my evidence base. I began quietly reaching out to these rejected students through the foundation, offering support tailored to their current circumstances, educational funding, professional development, networking opportunities. Meanwhile, the second chance scholars thrived at Westbrook despite predictions of their adjustment difficulties. Their academic performance exceeded the general scholarship recipient average, and several had already taken leadership roles in campus organizations. The data speaks for itself, I told President Hamilton during our quarterly review meeting, presenting graphs of the scholars' performance. By every objective measure, these students are excelling. Yes, the results are impressive, he conceded, though there have been some cultural integration challenges, such as, he hesitated. Nothing specific, just feedback from certain faculty about different expectations and perspectives. Different perspectives are precisely what we hope to cultivate, I replied. Unless there are specific conduct or academic concerns, I consider those differences a feature, not a bug. As the first year of the scholarship program concluded, I presented a comprehensive impact report to the Board of Trustees. The data was irrefutable. Second chance scholars were outperforming their peers academically while bringing valuable diversity to campus discussions and activities. Based on these results, the Foundation proposes expanding the program for the coming academic year, I concluded, with an additional endowment of $10 million. The board approved the expansion with minimal debate, the financial incentive too significant to reject, despite grumbling from certain quarters about changing institutional culture. That culture was precisely what I aimed to change, one decision, one student, one policy at a time. But as my influence grew, so did the resistance from those with the most to lose from genuine meritocracy. Miss Collins, thank you for making time for this meeting, Dean Westbrook said, his tone cordial but strained. Professor Parker and I wanted to discuss some concerns about the scholarship program's direction. I'd been expecting this conversation for weeks. The most recent selection committee meeting had been particularly contentious, with my insistence on admitting a brilliant student from Appalachia whose interview had been deemed too provincial by several committee members. Of course, I replied, settling into a chair across from them in the dean's wood-paneled office. I'm always open to feedback. Dean Westbrook exchanged a glance with Professor Parker before continuing. While we appreciate the Foundation's generous support, there are concerns that the current selection approach may be overcorrecting. Some traditional Westbrook values appear to be getting lost in the process. Which values specifically, I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. Community cohesion, shared cultural context, the intangible qualities that have defined Westbrook for generations. I smiled politely. Interesting. Because when I review Westbrook's official mission statement, I see commitments to academic excellence, ethical leadership, and diverse perspectives. Those are precisely the values our selection criteria prioritize. Miss Collins, Professor Parker interjected, her voice softer but no less persistent. There's more to education than can be captured in rubrics and metrics. We've been doing this for many years. Yes, you have, I interrupted, my tone still pleasant but firmer. And I've studied the outcomes of those years quite thoroughly. I opened my laptop and turned it toward them, displaying a series of charts. This shows the correlation between family income and scholarship selection rates over the past 2 decades, controlling for academic achievement. Care to explain this distribution? Dean Westbrook's face tightened. Data can be interpreted many ways. Indeed, let's try another interpretation. I switched to a different screen showing acceptance rates by high school type, public versus private, rural versus urban, or perhaps this one. Another screen showing the striking correlation between parental alumni status and scholarship selection. Where did you get this data? Professor Parker asked, her voice barely above a whisper. From Westbrook's own records, provided for endowment performance assessment, as permitted in our agreement. I closed the laptop. I have similar analyses for gender, race, and geographic distribution. The patterns are remarkably consistent. Dean Westbrook's professional facade cracked slightly. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Dean Westbrook. I'm stating directly that Westbrook's scholarship selection process has systematically favored students from privileged backgrounds while excluding equally qualified candidates from disadvantaged circumstances. Not occasionally or accidentally, but consistently and systematically. A heavy silence filled the room. You seem to have a personal interest in this issue, Dean Westbrook finally said, his tone insinuating. I met his gaze directly. I have a professional interest in ensuring our foundation's resources achieve their intended purpose, and a moral interest in educational equity. And if we find the current arrangement no longer meets Westbrook's needs? He asked, the threat barely veiled. That would be unfortunate, I replied calmly, particularly given the additional documentation I've compiled regarding certain irregularities in Westbrook's endowment management practices. The unusually high fees paid to advisors with personal connections to administration officials, for instance. I believe the board would find that information concerning, as might state regulators. The color drained from Dean Westbrook's face. Professor Parker looked away, suddenly fascinated by the view from the window. That sounds dangerously close to blackmail, Miss Collins, the dean said, his voice low. Not at all, just an observation about transparency and accountability. Values I'm sure Westbrook endorses. I stood, gathering my materials. I believe our endowment agreement continues to benefit both parties. The foundation provides financial support and selection expertise. Westbrook provides educational opportunity to exceptional students who might otherwise be overlooked. A fair exchange. I paused at the door. One more thing. The foundation will be conducting a 5-year retrospective study of rejected scholarship applicants from previous administrations, tracking their outcomes and achievements despite being deemed not Westbrook material. I expect the results will be illuminating. As I left, I caught Professor Parker watching me with an expression that had shifted from confusion to something approaching recognition. She didn't know who I was, not yet, but suspicion was beginning to form. Good. Recognition would make the final phase all the more satisfying. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, marked urgent from Zoe. Emergency meeting called by Board of Trustees. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Sources say Westbrook administration presenting proposal to modify scholarship endowment terms. I wasn't surprised. After our confrontation, Dean Westbrook had been quietly meeting with key board members and influential alumni, undoubtedly working to undermine the scholarship program and, by extension, my influence. Do we know what modifications they're proposing? I asked during our emergency strategy session that afternoon. According to my source, they're claiming the current selection criteria are causing community disruption and undermining Westbrook traditions, Zoe replied. They want to restore holistic assessment and reduce foundation oversight. I nodded, having anticipated this exact approach. They're framing it as maintaining institutional culture rather than what it actually is, reinstating bias. Can they do this legally? Asked Julian Chen, our legal counsel. The endowment agreement has specific terms. They're claiming the implementation has strayed from the spirit of the agreement, Zoe explained. Apparently, Dean Westbrook has compiled complaints from faculty about declining collegiality and confrontational perspectives among second-chance scholars. Translation: the new students aren't deferential enough to outdated hierarchies, I observed. Perfect. They're making our case for us. What's our counter strategy? Julian asked. I smiled. They've moved exactly as predicted, which means we implement our prepared response. That response had been developed months earlier, anticipating inevitable resistance once the scholarship program began showing real impact. It included 3 components: legal, public relations, and leverage. Julian, prepare documentation showing full compliance with all endowment terms plus impact reports demonstrating scholar success, I directed. Zoe, contact our media partners about the educational equity series we've discussed, emphasizing the positive outcomes of our approach without directly mentioning Westbrook yet. And the leverage? Zoe asked. I'll handle that personally, I replied. That evening, I sent carefully crafted emails to 5 key board members, those whose voting patterns suggested greater concern for Westbrook's reputation and financial stability than for maintaining traditional power structures. Each email included selected materials from my extensive research, tailored to the specific interests and concerns of the recipient. To the board chair, a corporate CEO concerned with institutional reputation, I sent data on how peer institutions were embracing equity initiatives and receiving positive press coverage. To the youngest trustee, an entrepreneur who had been advocating for innovation, I provided compelling success stories of second-chance scholars whose diverse perspectives had enhanced classroom discussions and campus initiatives. To the 3 others, a major donor concerned with financial stability, an academic focused on educational outcomes, and a prominent alumna with political aspirations, I sent equally strategic information packages, each making the case that preserving the scholarship program as designed was in Westbrook's best interests. I didn't need to win over the entire board, just enough members to block Dean Westbrook's proposal, or at least force significant compromise. The board meeting was closed to non-members, but Zoe's source provided real-time updates. Dean Westbrook presented his case passionately, framing the issue as protecting Westbrook's special character and traditions from outside interference. Then came the counter-arguments, led by the very board members I'd contacted. They raised questions about legal exposure for modifying the agreement, potential public relations damage, and most importantly, the undeniable success metrics of the current scholars. 3 hours later, Zoe's phone chimed with a final update. Proposal tabled for further study. Committee formed to evaluate scholarship impact and recommend potential refinements. Committee to include foundation representatives. They blinked, Julian observed. Temporarily, I cautioned. Dean Westbrook won't give up so easily, but he's now fighting on our chosen battlefield: data, outcomes, and documented success, rather than vague appeals to tradition and culture. I was right. Over the following weeks, Dean Westbrook launched what amounted to a whisper campaign, highlighting isolated incidents where second chance scholars had questioned traditional Westbrook practices or challenged faculty perspectives. He framed these not as healthy academic discourse, but as evidence of community disruption. He's trying to isolate the scholars, Zoe reported after speaking with several students, creating a narrative that they don't belong, that they're the problem. Then we changed the narrative, I decided. It's time for the next phase. That phase involved a carefully orchestrated media strategy highlighting the scholars' achievements, not just academically, but in enhancing campus life through new initiatives, perspectives, and collaborations. We arranged profiles in education publications, featured scholars at foundation events attended by influential figures, and commissioned an independent study comparing outcomes between traditional scholarship recipients and second-chance scholars. Simultaneously, I accelerated our outreach to past rejected applicants, building a network of accomplished individuals who had succeeded despite Westbrook's rejection. Their stories would form the centerpiece of our most powerful leverage, demonstrating not just the current success of our approach, but the historical cost of Westbrook's biased practices. When Dean Westbrook made his next move, proposing a separate traditional scholarship alongside the Second Chance program, I was prepared with our most compelling evidence yet. The emergency board meeting was called for a Friday afternoon, strategically timed when several progressive trustees had travel commitments. I'd learned of it only 48 hours in advance through Zoe's network of sources within the administration. Dean Westbrook has convinced President Hamilton to support a compromise proposal, Zoe reported. They'll maintain our scholarship program as is, but establish a parallel legacy of excellence scholarship using different selection criteria, essentially preserving their old system under a new name. Clever, I acknowledged. They get to keep our money while undermining our mission by directing the most promising, well-connected applicants to their separate track. Can we block it? Julian asked. Not directly. The endowment agreement governs our specific scholarship, not Westbrook's entire financial aid structure. I smiled. But that doesn't mean we can't respond. The boardroom was tense when I arrived, 15 minutes early to set up my materials and speak briefly with allies. Dean Westbrook barely concealed his surprise at my presence. Miss Collins, he greeted stiffly, I wasn't aware you'd been invited to this internal discussion. As the major stakeholder in the scholarship program being discussed, the Foundation's perspective seemed relevant, I replied pleasantly. President Hamilton agreed. The board chair called the meeting to order, and Dean Westbrook presented his proposal with practiced eloquence, framing the parallel scholarship structure as honoring diverse paths to excellence and preserving Westbrook's unique heritage while embracing new perspectives. When he finished, several trustees nodded approvingly. The board chair turned to me. Miss Collins, would you like to comment on how this might affect your Foundation's program? Thank you for the opportunity, I replied, rising and connecting my laptop to the room's projection system. I'd like to present some relevant findings from our ongoing research. The first slide appeared on the screen. Outcomes analysis, rejected qualified applicants, 2005 to 2020 inches. For the past 2 years, the Collins Foundation has been conducting a comprehensive study of applicants rejected from Westbrook's Opportunity Scholarship Program despite meeting or exceeding the academic qualifications of those selected, I began. The results are remarkable. I clicked to the next slide showing comparison metrics between accepted scholars and rejected applicants who had attended other institutions. GPA, graduate school acceptance, professional achievements, income levels. Across nearly every metric, the rejected students had performed as well or better than their Westbrook counterparts. These students weren't rejected because they lacked potential, I continued. They were rejected based on factors unrelated to merit or future success. Dean Westbrook shifted uncomfortably. Miss Collins, with all due respect, this seems tangential to today's discussion. On the contrary, Dean Westbrook, it's directly relevant to whether Westbrook should maintain 2 separate scholarship tracks with different selection criteria. I clicked to the next slide. This shows the socioeconomic distribution of rejected qualified applicants over the 15-year period. Notice any patterns? The graph displayed an overwhelming skew toward lower income brackets and first-generation college students among rejected qualified applicants. Now compare this to the socioeconomic distribution of accepted scholars during the same period. I clicked again, showing an equally stark pattern favoring affluent applicants. Correlation doesn't prove causation, Professor Parker interjected, though her voice lacked conviction. You're absolutely right, Professor Parker, which is why we conducted interviews with 17 former scholarship committee members who served during this period. I clicked to a slide showing anonymized quotes from these interviews, several explicitly confirming that non-academic factors, including cultural fit, social readiness, and even family connections, had influenced decisions. The room had grown very quiet. Miss Collins, the board chair said carefully, these are serious allegations. They're not allegations. They're documented patterns based on Westbrook's own records and testimony from your own faculty and staff. I clicked to a new slide. But that's only half the story. The true cost of these practices isn't just the rejected students, it's the institutional impact. The next series of slides demonstrated how peer institutions that had implemented genuinely merit-based selection had improved not just diversity, but overall academic standing, innovation metrics, and alumni success. The proposed Legacy of Excellence scholarship would perpetuate a system that has empirically underperformed while excluding qualified applicants for non-merit-based reasons. I paused, looking directly at Dean Westbrook. I believe that violates not just the spirit of our endowment agreement, but Westbrook's own stated mission of academic excellence and ethical leadership. The final slide displayed a simple question. Is maintaining traditional selection practices worth the cost to institutional integrity, academic excellence, and future student success? I returned to my seat as murmurs spread around the table. The board chair called for a brief recess, during which trustees gathered in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones. When the meeting reconvened, the discussion had shifted dramatically. Rather than debating the parallel scholarship proposal, board members began questioning the existing practices and their implications for Westbrook's reputation and mission. I move that we table the proposal for a parallel scholarship structure, the youngest trustee finally said, and instead commission a comprehensive review of all scholarship selection processes to ensure alignment with our commitment to merit, excellence, and ethical leadership. The motion passed with a clear majority. Dean Westbrook sat stone-faced, while President Hamilton, reading the room, quickly positioned himself as supportive of the review process. But I wasn't finished. As the meeting was concluding, I requested a final moment to address the board. The Collins Foundation is committed to educational opportunity based on merit rather than privilege, I stated. To support Westbrook's review process, we're prepared to increase our endowment by an additional $15 million conditional on the implementation of transparent, equitable selection practices across all scholarship programs. The financial incentives sealed the transformation. Over the next 6 months, Westbrook's entire scholarship structure underwent comprehensive revision, with new rubrics, diverse selection committees, and transparent evaluation criteria. Dean Westbrook's influence waned as younger faculty embraced the changes and the positive publicity they generated. When he announced his early retirement the following year, few were surprised. Professor Parker, in contrast, became an unexpected ally in the reform process, confessing privately that she had harbored doubts about the old system for years, but had lacked the power to challenge it. The revolution wasn't instantaneous or absolute, but it was irreversible. Each new class of truly diverse scholars strengthened the case for merit-based opportunity, making regression to old practices increasingly untenable. And through it all, no one recognized me as the rejected applicant from Little Creek, whose potential they had dismissed 15 years earlier. No one except perhaps Professor Parker, whose puzzled glances suggested growing suspicion but never certainty. That recognition would come, but on my terms and timing, at the moment of maximum impact.